About 3 weeks ago, a top secret whistleblower who had been on a retrieval team dealing with disabled man-made alien reproduction vehicles, as they're called, and the actual ET vehicles, contacted us. And he didn't know, it coincided with about when senior U.S. government officials had contacted us to help them get intelligence and actionable intelligence because they had been blocked, quote unquote, even though they had top secret access and black budget knowledge and unacknowledged special access knowledge, which are the top secret projects that deal with many issues, not just UFO and ET issues. And so I said, look, we'll put together everything I have, and we're going to put it together for you, and it's going to be whatever we're going to pull out the stops. Somehow the universe arranged, this guy didn't know that, contacts us through our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, and there's a box there for witnesses, military whistleblower folks. And as you know, I've interviewed almost 1,000 now, upper 900s of these guys. Takes a lot of time, and only a certain number want to be identified publicly. This gentleman does not want his name out, but his information has been handed over to the relevant folks who need to know. But the case, I asked him, and he said, you can present all of this to the public, just leave my particular location and name out of it. Wonderful guy. So after 9/11, he thought, well, I'm going to join the military, because his whole family was military. And the screen just went back down. Got an AV problem? No signal. Anyway, I'll tell this story. Hopefully you'll get the AV back up, because it's critical. And what happened is he went to Fort Knox and did the intake and all that. I'm pretty sure because he had family members, grandfather, father, uncles, who had worked in these very sensitive projects. And he didn't know the details. He just knew they had dealt with a lot of very sensitive material since World War II. Because even in families, this is not talked about, and they're not allowed to. And what happened is he joined. He was going to be a tank operator. And I think the sign-on bonus was $8,000, he said, $8,000 then. And instead, he got picked out, went to another room, and there was a guy in there and says, we want you to work on a special operation. And we will put $80,000 in your bank account. And it was, 20 years ago, fair amount of money. And in real time did so, boom. But you're going to be working on helping us retrieve. Now, the cover story was, we have aircraft, helicopters, jets, what have you, that will have a mishap and crash. And you have to have top secret clearance because some of the components of those aircraft are classified, and we don't want our foreign enemies to know them. So he said, okay. So he went through a training process for that. I won't go into all those details. We have all the details, but to get cut to the chase, at some point he was deployed up to the Nevada test range. Now, pop culture, Area 51 in Nevada. Just so you know, Area 51 is a grid on a map. There's also Area 52, et cetera. So the Nellis Range and Air Force Base, and then going further north, you get the Nevada test site, all that, where a lot of the atomic weapons were tested, et cetera, right? Everybody know that. So they were on a remote site. You see his drawing of it, of that facility. So what I'm going to do, thanks to Michael Schratt and his team, and Michael's here, thank you, great guy, rely on him totally. And also, I want to acknowledge Jim Goodall. He's here. We're great aerospace writer, illustrator. He was one of the last men to talk to Ben Rich at Lockheed Skunk Works. And as you know, got this story. He said, beyond what you know in Star Trek and Star Wars or whatever, it's out in the desert. And when he wasn't talking about Area 51, he was talking about the Lockheed facilities and others. This man, of course, thinking he's embedded initially in this retrieval, they did that. You know, there'd be a chopper crash or a jet or, you know, whatever, Hornet. And they would get the components, and there were different people. And some were dealing with the larger airframe, some with bigger parts, and he was there to scrub the site. They had metal detectors, and they go around. He said it was basically a high-tech garbage man, picking up any little thing that would be left, and nothing was left, nothing. So eventually they get called out and get deployed up to this base. So it's way far north. You go up, SUVs take you into a gate not manned. There are RFID chips to enter, and you go through, and then the Humvees take you out to this helicopter base, which is up on your screen. Now, a clearer drawing of it is what Michael did, Michael Schratt, and you see it here. So you have the layout, the basic layout of this, and we have all the intelligence on its location, what have you. You see the dirt road off to the right and the gate. And you know, there are hangars, 2 Quonset type hangars with helipads outside, and a formation area, garage, sea cans, which are, you know, on the CH-47, you know, big choppers, and what have you. And he very funnily says, leper colony or cancer factor where you could go and smoke. So that's just the layout, you know, because he remembered the layout of the facility. And then he, you know, he sort of said, you know, I want to show you what the inside. So then we have this next one, which the next drawing of inside one of these. And you can see it's very hard, but you'd have the sea cans and the helicopters and other stuff in one of these big Quonset huts. But it was huge, and it was almost like a football stadium inside, vaulted ceiling, et cetera, and so on. And this actually was, I'm sorry, a later thing. We'll get to that. But the underground is another underground base. And then the first thing he sent out on, so they're thinking it was, you know, full alert. They're led in by Apaches, Hellfire missiles on them, and then these big Chinooks and the CH-47s, they get on with the Delta Group. He called it Delta Group. That were the elite, and then there are the worker bees, which he was part of. And then they were deployed up to the northern, way out north on the range. At that point, is there a problem? So let's have a seat and not be talking during the presentation. Thanks. So what happened is that, you know, he thought, well, we're going to go out and retrieve a downed jet or chopper that malfunctioned. No. So what you see here is his drawing as they came up on this object. And it was a disabled, man-made UFO. And I know it's hard to see this as his drawing. The reason I'm putting his drawings in, because it gives the verification of then the artist rendition. That the next slide you'll see is what, the representation, beautifully done, of this craft that was on the desert floor, non-functional. So this obviously had to be extracted and brought back. But this was, again, a manned device. It was not, you can see there are seams, there are rivets. Very important for you CE5 folks to understand this. The ones that are interstellar, very different. These are obviously man-made, but they're magnetic propulsion field, electromagnetic field propulsion. Some call it electromagnetogravitics. When they're operational, he says all you would hear is a hum, like a transformer. Because they have no jets, They have no rockets. There's no exhaust, etc. So that's what this was. And so this was the first unconventional, let's call it, object that he was deployed to retrieve. And this particular craft, they had to get out of there, very carefully and move back to, and he honestly would not know where they were finally sent back to, but it was somewhere down in the Nellis facility. So at this point, he realizes, well, I'm really doing something here, and of course they were all isolated. They lived underground at that base where the quarters were. When they first got there, it was very dusty, like that particular base had not been used for a while. And this is in 2004. So that first event was April 2004, about 18 years ago. And so when he realized that this is what he was doing with, he said, well, I'll do it. He was, a soldier, and the team that he was embedded with were very highly disciplined. He was not clear to know who deployed them, where things ended up. He was just there as a worker. Okay, so I want to be very clear on what his role was. He was not senior in the chain of command on that. And this next picture is an image, and you'll see the representation next, of this craft and how it really looked like by Michael Schratt. Excellent. Now, of course, we can study these for hours, so this is a big story to get through. And what I find very interesting is that you look at all the rivets in the sections. He makes the point, a no-step marking. Well, an interstellar vehicle doesn't say no step here. It is that dog don't hunt, as we say in North Carolina. A blinking red light and green light. And this is, not unlike the sort of triangular craft that you've seen the fraudsters, like Luis Elizondo and others, that are leaking these items that you see on CNN and 60 Minutes and maybe Vice TV. And of course, the media doesn't know enough not to know that those are ours over our ships. There's a nav light on that sucker, and you get close enough to it, you see this kind of superstructure details, rivets, struts, parts. Actual interstellar vehicles have none of that. And they certainly aren't marked no step. Now, the biggest part of the secrecy on this subject, they're happy for people to think there are ETs or aliens out there. They really don't want people to know this. This is the heart of the secrecy, because it is only by keeping this under wraps from the president, from the senators, and particularly the Fourth Estate, the media. It's really the media that have dropped the ball on this. No offense to my friends in the media. Because they're basically become scribes taking dictation from the right hand of the king, meaning whatever is told to them, instead of doing actual investigations and checks and balances. Big problem. Big problem in an alleged democracy. So as you look at this schematic and you say, well, a lot of people have seen these silent triangular objects. Are all of those man-made? No. There are some that are 800 feet, 3 football fields on a side, ones that we had over us in Belgium back in the early 90s when I went there. So there are ones that look like, and they're kind of copycat. But what better way to deceive the public? So you take a shape that they have retrieved through electronic warfare systems that are extraterrestrial, and then you make airforms in any shape you want around a similar propulsion and energy system. It's a classic misdirect, false flag. So that's why you need to know this. And not only does the public need to know it, I hope this mic isn't falling down. Huh? Okay, no, there's one, I have 3. But people put tape on me, and they don't realize I'm furry, kind of like your dog. I love dogs. Who's your doggy? My wife gave me a magnet. It says, who's your doggy? I'm like a big dog. Anyway. I know, it's so cute. So the whole point of this schematic is to give the detail that's in his drawing. This is why Michael Schratt, thank you, he's done such a great job with the beautiful professional work. And when you look at these, you realize that it's very easy to deceive. I don't know if there are 10 people in the government of the United States that you can name who would know anything about this, and I doubt there are 10. Now there's a problem, because that means that they are subject to a deceptive operation, what the Pentagon calls a deceptive indication and warning, which is the proper term for a false flag, where something could be done and it would look like it's an attack or an event or a threat from out there, and it's this clandestine, beyond black, above top secret operation who is actually deceiving everybody. And imagine you're a jet pilot, like I spoke with David Fravor, who was the guy who was the Hornet F-18 pilot, chased the Tic Tac off the coast of California. You've all seen it. And he said, no, there's just no way that could be ours. It was a Lockheed object. But of course, if you're read into jet engines or rockets or what have you, you're not going to be read into this. But that's dangerous, because if you're a flag officer, and people I have briefed, if you have top secret clearance, you're managing the black budget of the United States, this is who I've met with, and over the years, you're the director of the CIA, you're the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, you're the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, et cetera. I've met with all these folks. And you are not read into this. It's very easy to have something terrible happen, because you don't have the information and the knowledge to make an assessment. You can't discern. Is it a threat from outer space, or what? Now, in most cases, 99.9999999% of the cases of everyone I've briefed in Washington or in other locations, including members of Congress since the early 90s, they're not even aware to ask that question. The correct question isn't being asked. Not by the mainstream media, not on Fox News the other night, not by the UFO subculture, and not by the senators and congressmen or the parliaments around the world. And without that knowledge, they're flying through a fog of no information with no radar, no instrumentation, and they can hit whatever thing comes up, metaphorically. And that's the risk. This kind of secrecy that surpasses the Constitution, chain of command, and rule of law is an existential threat to our country, to every other nation on earth, and to the future of humanity. Because you have people with the means and the intention to deceive. So in the last month, I've had a number of meetings in sensitive locations in DC where I've met with people who are absolutely, if you knew who they were, you'd say they have to know about this. They have no idea what this is until 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Now that is treason. So let me be blunt to those listening in the system, the covert. If the people who are responsible to we the people here and any other country are not given access to this information and can be tricked into false assessments and policies that are false. And this is what happened to President Trump and Vice President Pence. They had people come into the White House, and I know this for a personal fact, because people on my team were the inner circle who literally were the biggest folks for the Trump and Pence presidency. And unfortunately, I didn't get access to the last 5 months of his term. And by then, I was approached because they were in a panic. not the president, not the vice president, the people around them said, they're being told that there's an alien threat. And they're, the whole Space Force, but they have assessed that the aliens are a threat and that they need to be engaged militarily. Now, that game was played from Truman forward. But they wait for someone who they think will go along with that military response. Carter had this pitch to him. I know Colonel Holman. He was on the committee team, interagency team, that was selling Star Wars, SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. Carter wouldn't bite. He had a sighting. He was convinced these objects were not hostile. And so, but Reagan they brought in portfolios of things that were terrifying, just like what was released a few days ago by the Pentagon, 1,500 pages of Oppo research, fake nonsense. Everything in there about the abductions, the radiation burns, those 100% of those cases that Dr. Christopher Greer, Kit Green, I've known these people for many years, are all man-made events. Every single last one of them, masquerading as something from out there that's harming people, getting women pregnant, causing brain injuries, radiation damage, blisters, abductions, mutilations. Now, some years ago, you may recall I predicted that when they were ready to pull the trigger on this, they'll start releasing those files, but see, covertly in meetings where they think they have someone they can maneuver, a president or a senator or whoever, they will bring in a portfolio more gruesome than what was just released. And they will convince those leaders to go along with a clandestine operation that militarizes and weaponizes space and targets these objects under the ruse that they are a threat based on evidence that these covert projects have created and put in front of them. Are you understanding what I'm saying? That's how this works. Now, and I'm not happy to tell you this news because it's very dangerous, the game being played for some years. But, look, that fire started burning out of control before I was born, and I'm no spring chicken. I was born in 1955. So what we're looking at here is not only a complete decapitation of the chain of command, but to the extent that any chain of command personnel at a senior policy level are read in, they are read in with a mixture of information and disinformation. But they're not told what it is they're seeing, because they're not asking the question, how many of these cases are from an extraterrestrial origin and which ones are being created through, it's like the Wizard of Oz with the old man behind the curtain pulling all the levers, scaring the bejeebies. That's what they're doing to you, to the media, and to our leaders. And we got to call that out. So now, this next image was another retrieval operation, and the second one he had to be sent on, and they were put on because they were blackened out Chinooks, CH-47s. They were let out by Apaches with Hellfire missiles up to some lake area, and there was part of a craft that was had sort of broken apart. It was man-made. This is man-made again. Some of it was in trees and scattered, and most of it was intact. So again, they had the sea cans and the big CH-47s. They gathered stuff up, and then they took off and they flew for quite some time to an area where there was a gigantic soybean field, just like you'd be out in Midwest or any state that has big, flat agricultural area. Now, he didn't know where, because he was not cleared to knowing where. A lot of places they'd be deployed, blackened out. He had no idea where he was. You can know about how much time, but it could be what to where. And they weren't allowed to know that. It was like need to know minimum number of people. The Delta group, he called it, knew those guys, and they were the ones in charge. He was not. I just want to be clear so I don't overstate. He's very honest about not overstating things, what he doesn't know. It's very important. Don't get over your skis. So the worst doctors I've ever met are ones who think they know more than they do, and they kill you. So, right? Bury their mistakes. So you got to know what you don't know. This next drawing, Mr. Schreck did a great representation of this. Now, the way he explained, it was very emotional for him. He says, so we're coming into this thing, just looks like a normal soybean field. So you're flying in. Now get a load of this. So you're flying in. All of a sudden, about a tenth of a mile square of what looks like an alleged soybean field goes down. So they come in on this approach path, go in, land on this elevator. It's an elevator, big, and goes underground. And unfortunately, I had put out an order, and we didn't have his drawing of it, of what that big stadium-sized place was. So underground, they had this enormous facility, and it would have nobody driving by would know what that is. Now, this is not unusual. These facilities are scattered strategically around the world and around the United States. I have a man who's on my team who was flown into Alice Springs in the middle of the outback of Australia, and on a chopper, and he's coming in, and it looks like a hillside, and the hillside was actually sort of holographically contiguous with the natural landscape. They approach, they go in, and there's one of these elevators. They go in, they land, they go deep underground. So remember, anything important is in a deep underground military base, or something like that, or in space. It's above the surface. It's either redundant, and there's a replica, or it's not mission critical, above top secret stuff. Just keep that in mind. So that is where they took this debris, because a lot of times they can only take it so far without it. The further you have to move it, the higher the risk of a leak. So these exist in various places. I was recently read into a project in outside Seoul, South Korea, where we had, with an electronic warfare system, downed a very large extraterrestrial vehicle. It was so large, it was in the mountains outside Seoul, that they could not move it. So they bored out a huge part of a mountain, and that's a SCIF, Secure Communication Information Facility and Base, that they built just for that one craft where they're studying it. A senior guy that was actually there. So these are the kinds of folks we're handing off to these relevant people in the legal part of the United States government, as opposed to the unconstitutional and corrupt operations. So all of that happened. I mean, there's an infinite amount of detail here, but this is an add-on presentation, as you know, and I need to get through it. And there's a lot yet, because now we're getting to the mainline thing that happened, that he thought, well, these are exotic aircraft that are man-made. He didn't know anything about the extraterrestrial projects. So finally, they go on an alert. It's in late afternoon. They go north, and he says he's estimated the speed of those Chinooks about 64 miles from this helicopter base, which was already far north on the range than the Nevada test site. So they go up there, and they didn't go to the next slide. This is what he comes across. So this is an extraterrestrial vehicle that we had apparently disabled, used some kind of electronic warfare system that was then forced down way out in the desert. And above it, you'll see there's one of our man-made alien reproduction vehicles, or man-made UFOs. And it was sort of holding that object in check. And they came in with the Apaches were fully loaded hot with the Hellfire missiles, because this was an encounter with an extraterrestrial vehicle that they had done, and there were life forms on board, living life forms. So at that point, they get out, their own hazmat, they have, the masks, everything, the gas, the rebreathers and hazmat uniforms. So that was standard operating procedure on all these retrieval operations. And they get there, and and we'll go to the next one. This is a beautiful illustration I just got today from Mr. Schratt of this craft, 65 feet across, about 65 feet diameter, pretty big. And above it was a smaller alien reproduction vehicle, man-made UFO. And then, of course, it shows the choppers here. Now, these little bodies around it, here's what happened. So this isn't in the illustration. So as they approach and they're coming in on this thing, around the back side of it, there's like a fruit roll-up. This fruit roll-up kind of unfurls out of this interstellar vehicle, and it comes down. And there are 3 ETs that come out of it, the actual extraterrestrial biological entities, EVANs. And they emerge, and of course the craft is sort of in a stunned, but it's still kind of functional. But then very suddenly, when they're outside, obviously there must have been a couple more inside, it starts glowing red and then magenta, almost purple. If we can turn off cell phones, I'd appreciate it, just out of courtesy. And so what happens at that point, the man-made UFO, the alien reproduction vehicle, this triangular one goes, takes off to the west because it knows something's about to happen. And they didn't want to come down. And then all the other personnel, the Delta group folks, most everyone, not everyone, were some energy system went out that basically didn't hurt anyone but made them just fall asleep. So he says people just kind of slumped over. And so the whole operation was put into stasis, was basically put into suspension, like an anesthesia. And at that point, he was still conscious, and he was holding a bucket. Because he was there to pick up the small pieces, not knowing if this thing had been blown to smithereens or not, or what had happened. It was fully intact still. And one thing he said about these struts it was on, it seemed impossibly flimsy and thin, but held this massive 65-foot diameter craft up. At that point, and the next drawing, if we can go to the next slide, is the one that was kind of keeping it in check. This smaller, I think he said it was about 30 feet across, not a great big one. That was the man-made one, this one. And at that point, as it took off, 2 of the 3 ETs that came out of the vehicle came over to him, very close, I mean, like right here. And you'll see this next image, and one was male and one was female. About 5 feet tall, no hair and no pinna. The pinna is our chimpanzee flat monkey, these monkey things. Very fine featured, very, very tight fitting, one piece, seamless suit. And eyes, he said very much like human eyes in the sense that they were whites and a pupil, iris, just very human in that sense. And they came over, one of them touched him, and they were very curious about his pail. They thought it was very strange. Why was this guy carrying a bucket? And he said they communicated in almost all at once, thought form, images, feelings all together. And I said, yes, that is exactly how they communicate, which is why we're doing CE5 contact. Now, he didn't know any of this. I mean, he's a young man. I think at that point he would have been maybe 24 years old. This is in May now of 2004. And they say, stop. This is being conveyed mentally or through thought impressions. And he said it's like they could feel and read everything in his mind and heart, but they felt he was a good guy, and he is. And he said, basically communicate to your people, stop this, we're on to you, and we're not going to be tricked by it. And this needs to stop, because we're not here to harm anyone. And he knew that they were harmless. And that it then dawned on him, damn, we're the problem. We're the aggressors, these covert operations. And he was devastated, because he had been a very patriotic, he was joining because after 9/11, right? And he was a really, like most military people, are regular stand-up good people. They're not sociopaths. Now, they may have commanders that are sociopaths, all right? But they're not. Rank and file. They're good guys and women. And by the way, there were women on this team. There were men and women. So this being, after this communication, he then had the same thing. He sort of slumped over, and it was like falling asleep, anesthetized. The next thing he and everyone else on site knows, let's go to the next slide. This is Michael Schratt's representation of them, very good, because it shows the musculature in a very, very tight, almost like skin-like fitting outfit, which he said was sort of opalescent. It was almost like it was like an opalescent, energetic, and they are, because these uniforms are not just clothing, but they're also assist with teleportation, communication, everything. So they're technological garb. It's like the ultimate Fitbit, but cosmic level Fitbit or what have you. I'm just trying to use analogies that we can relate to, So, not that I have a Fitbit. I'm lucky if I can get my phone to work. But I think that's, he said it was really quite amazing, the feel, the energy, and even the opalescent sort of quality of the clothing. Now, at this point, the next thing he knows, almost instantly, the CH-47s, the Apaches, the Delta Force people, all of them, boom, teleported back to that 64 miles south to the base, to that remote base. And they all came to, unharmed, nobody was harmed. These civilizations are not violent. They will stop someone from killing them, but they are not hostile, contrary to what people have been brainwashed. That's why yesterday I did that whole first 45 minutes about the cosmic detox, the brainwashing you've all taken in. And so at that point, he said that all hell broke loose. And when I mean hell broke loose, they realize they've just been picked up, boom, back at the base, like, you go back. And they sent them back. So that's, we understand how that happens if you understand quantum physics, entangled universe, but doing it on a macro scale. So you can do this very high level of physics, trans-dimensional, but you can take one object, you can do it with particles, obviously they've done that, but you can do it with a whole spacecraft, a whole battleship, or a whole group deployment squadron like this with helicopters and personnel, take them and go boom, boom, you're back there. Now, with that kind of technology, think a minute, you're interstellar, you're way past the development of a hydrogen bomb, thousands of years. You've got this ability. If they were hostile, and the nonsense we've been doing since the mid-40s with atomic and hydrogen bombs that tear the fabric of space-time and disrupt their worlds, we would not be sitting here having a conversation. We would not. And I said this when I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with the colonel in charge of that facility that the early remains from Roswell were sent to. I said, he was saying they had an intelligence officer there and this colonel, and I had my military advisor and another person, an observer on my team, former State Department guy. And he says, the colonel says, well, what if these civilizations were a threat to us? I said, sir, with all due respect, given the galactically stupid things we have been doing for 70 years, you and I would not be breathing the free air of Earth. It'd be point, set, match, over the day we detonated that bomb at the Trinity site in 1945 in New Mexico. End of discussion. And the intelligence guy was just writing him. Bruce Canola was his name. So, by the way, that's an interesting meeting, because what happened, is to divert a little bit, give you some background. I had been invited to the JY Ranch in the Tetons that the Rockefeller family owns, because Lawrence Rockefeller, who's now deceased, was very supportive of what we're doing with CE5 and very interested in this subject. And he was the brother of David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank, now JP Morgan Chase. And that brings me to another detail. When these guys would get leave to go into Las Vegas from that base, they all had black Chase, JP Morgan Chase credit cards that they could spend, do what they wanted. But that was specifically the bank, black, budget, through Chase. There's a data point for you investigators. Ouch. Ouch. So, so every little detail matters, by the way. Every little detail matters at this point. So at that meeting at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, now this is 1993, September. Man, I'm at the Rockefeller Ranch, and it's this whole meeting, and there are all these people there, some of whom were civilians, some spooks, operatives. And, at some point, it comes up that, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm putting the briefing together for the president and the director of the CIA. And of course, could have heard a pin drop. And they said, well, where are you going from here? I said, well, I'm going from here to Wright-Patterson to meet with the guys at the Blue Room, as Senator Barry Goldwater called it, at Wright-Pat, where this stuff is stored. But I'm not going into that facility. I already know what they have there. I've already been fully read into all that and briefed by people who have been in there for years. Now, this is 93. It was 29 years ago. And so they go, my God, what? So, of course, the whole table, the table got turned upside down because they thought this was going to be a normal UFO gab fest of, like if you went to a conference in 1960, 70, 80, 2000, 2022, you'd hear the same crap over and over and over and over, play the replay button, because that's all that is. And I said, no, this is what we're doing. But this whole issue of how these projects run and the way even people who are at a certain level, because it's compartmented, it's TSSCI, top secret special compartment information, but on steroids, way beyond black, beyond above top secret. It is so highly compartmented that the people that you would interface with, in my position, or if you were a senator or a president, they only have a piece of this. And they're going to only tell you what they've been told. And they believe what they've been told because they say, yes, sir. It's like Senator John Warner, the senior Republican. It was just, yes, sir. Okay, right. Now, what you have to then realize is that a lack of knowledge is a liability for the president, the Congress, every nation on the planet, and all of the American public. And it doesn't help that the media just keeps having the same charlatans up like they did 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago, talking about the same nonsense without context or without any detail. And it's a false narrative that just keeps getting replayed and replayed in an echo chamber. Dangerous, because that's how you stumble into World War III. And I don't mean with Russia. I mean where they stage something from outer space as a threat. Now, so he gets back. Now, the whole command, getting back to this event, they're furious that they lost this critter, this ET craft, and the bodies, because they were a retrieval. They were there to get that damn thing. And it got away. Well, they all get called separately and are in debriefs. And he, with the people taking him on, was read the riot act and threatened. He says, look, I'm not going to have anything more to do with this operation. Those visitors are completely amazing beings, and we're the problem. I'm not going to be part of something that's evil as shit, I'm quoting. And the guy says, you're not leaving alive out of this facility. Now, that is how it works. And by the way, your bank account is erased. And your record ever since Fort Knox is erased. But he says, I get to contact, and he used the name of an Uncle Steve, won't say who it is, who is a Navy guy, not Army. He didn't listen to Army. His family were all branches, mostly Marine and Navy. And he says, I'm going to call him, because he knew that he was tied into some very, very classified projects. He didn't know what. So his uncle said something to those guys, and they held him without food, water, sleep, anything for 2 days. And 10 Marines came in black SUVs and extricated him from that base, and he got out. But then, for, a year or so, there'd be people take shots at him and deliberately miss, and phone calls and threats and this and that. Finally, just to put the icing on the cake, in 2006, when he was back home out in the Midwest, where I won't say where, we'll have this next slide. And he's going fishing. It's 1:42 in the afternoon in the summer. It was June 2006. And all of a sudden, he had an old Toyota pickup truck with the crank windows and all that, and it dies. The engine dies. And he looks up, and there's one of these triangular ARVs. Boom. Then he looks to the side of his truck, and there are 3 aliens. Except he sees them, and they're moving in unison, kind of robotically. And they're not extraterrestrials. They're ours. And this is huge. Now, I can't tell you how many dozens of tactical operators of these devices and craft I've met with who will not go on the record. But now we have the details on this case, just like Doty, who is a professional disinformation officer, admitted we were doing the abductions, and Jacques Vallée admitted to having a CIA document from 1985 outlining the CIA program conducting fake alien abductions in Latin America, Brazil, and Argentina, et cetera, and so on ad nauseum. So sorry to break your scary alien paradigm, but that's all staged, 100%, start to finish. If you believe it, otherwise, with all due respect, you're delusional. Now, I know delusions when I see them. A lot of people in the ER come in delusional. So this graphic, there were these 3 fake aliens you see drawn here, a kind of cute drawing. But in the drainage ditch, what he couldn't draw very well was it looked like it was just grass and shrubs and stuff, but it started moving like 2 bumps. It was operatives. It was the ET it was the alien, fake alien, what we call program life forms. Operators. And so at some point he opens his car door, bang, and knocks one of them down, and the other one moves back, these grays, this is the grays, and knocks it down. He gets out of the car and starts kicking the life out of it. This is true. Now, you'll see this next slide. You can see how they fell down and what he was, and the whole setup for this, where the at this point it's a clusterfuck. Excuse my language, but good. My father was Navy, so it was like so. This is what happened. I won't go into all that. We're going to run out of time on this, but the long story short is, at that point, these clumps of grass and shrub get up. and it's men. And one of them has like a small suitcase that's the operator for the aliens, the fake aliens. The other one has like a device that he gets hit with. And it's more like a something, another, and it's an energy weapon. He just slumps. He says like a sack of potatoes just goes over. Okay. But in the process, he eventually remembers that after he had kicked this one, and here's this next drawing, gives you more of a close-up of what this man-made E.T., those of you who read Whitley Strieber's books and Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and John Mack and 99.9999999 to the nth degree of everything ufological. Here you go. Those are ours. Those are ours. Those are ours. And you can see, and he describes it in a lot of detail of what this guy. He said it was very interesting because their feet didn't have toes. It was just like a platform thing. And he could tell because he said there were the three of them would all move in unison. Now, this is not unlike Stan Romanek when he was abducted and this critter came into his house. I saw the video of it before Disney bought it and black shelved it. True. Media is very problematic in this country. Not you good guys from Vice TV, but so here we hope. We'll see. We'll see. I reserve judgment. So what happened at this point is, he sees that these two operatives and these three aliens that are man-made ones. See, when I use the word alien, I'm referring to man-made. When I use extraterrestrial, I mean an or an ET. So if you come up to me and you say, I saw an alien, I'm thinking you saw him or some other one that they've created. All right, just so you know what the lexicon is here. Don't use the alien word around me unless you're referring to the man-made ones. And so, because that's 99% of the public's view of what an alien is, right? It's stereotypical. So this next slide is so much fun because he actually describes this after he kicked it, and the one that was down, it sort of went through a reset, like when you crash a computer and reboot. So it kind of was almost like in a fetal, and then it kind of got up, kind of mechanically, but it looked like it was flesh and all this. Very, very convincing. And I'm not going to go through all this, and we have a wonderful drawing from Michael Schratt that takes his original and sort of illustrates all this function and the way it moved and everything else. And it talked about, the motherboard in the brain and the man-made RAV. I mean, he goes through all this detail in this graphic. This right here, this one is probably an hour to 2 hour presentation. This, on the mechanics and the circuitry and how we make these things. We don't have time. And then this next one is just his original schematic without a lot of detail of the one that he ruptured the skin. Now the skin wasn't skin like we have. It looked kind of grayish and realistic. And but he said there was this stuff. I love what he wrote. He says I was stomping and kicked and ripped the skin, quote, and it tore. Appeared to be bundles of wires and tubes underneath, of course, and also something glinted, shiny, and metallic, and there was a strong chemical smell that oozed, and liquid came out. It's sort of an amber opalescent liquid that came out of it, but it was able to get back up. Now, what Michael Schratt gave us today is this really cool rendition of it, representation of it, of the gray, and then with the rip, and then the inside with the circuitry and what have you. So this is the 90% of, quote, alien reports are these that are used with man-made UFOs, et cetera, and so on.